Hi, and welcome to our ninth video for our English 2170 Introduction to Film class. And this will be a quick video on the traits of the musical genre. The central aesthetic strategy of the classical Hollywood musical is it presents a better world than the one that we actually live in. As I write on the slide, the genre is animated by the utopian belief that the world is a fundamentally good place and that everything will work out in the end. Now, and that happens over and over again in the musicals that you watch. The slide picture here is from Meet Me in St. Louis, where Esther, played by Judy Garland, falls for the boy next door and gets him at the end, and also solves the central narrative enigma of whether or not the family will move from St. Louis. And she wins, the family stays in St. Louis, and everybody lives happily ever after. And this is kind of a paradigmatic example of the classical Hollywood musical, how everything works out for the people that it should work out for. And you can see that in Singing in the Rain too, right? Lena Lamont, the villain, gets hers, and Kathy and Don end up together, and it's all a beautiful package that's wrapped at the end. Now, one of the things that I should point out is that the classical Hollywood musical begins with the conversion to sound in the late 1920s, but it's possible to sort of trace revisions to the classical Hollywood utopianism in musicals that start to appear in the 1960s and certainly in the present. So you can point to various musicals that are made today, like Les Mis, which does not present a better world, which presents sorrow and sadness. Rent. There are a number of musicals that question this utopianism, and that's the revisionist phase of the evolution of the musical, right? So if Carl Welty says the musical has to be invented, then there's a classical version, and that's where the utopianism really thrives. There is a revisionist period that questions that utopianism, throws it into relief, interrogates it, shows the world to be worse than we know it is, and otherwise sort of subverts that general tendency. Classical musicals and some post-classical musicals also are designed around romantic plots. So the central characters are usually young lovers who end up together at the end of the narrative. There are second bananas who also have their own sort of love affairs that unfold. So when you watch the movie Grease, for example, there's the central pair of Olivia Newton-John and John Travolta, but underneath it there's Rizzo and her boyfriend who have to deal actually with the issue of pregnancy in Grease. So that's kind of maybe a post-utopian approach to the musical. And then often there are authority figures that block the romance, like in Singing in the Rain, where Don Lockwood, played by Gene Kelly here, and Kathy Selden can't get together because it would ruin the publicity for the studio with Don and Lena. So there are some obstacles put up, but everything works out in the end, particularly in the utopian variety of the musical. Musicals build in variation among themselves by the degree to which they have song and dance and in what combination they appear. So many of the musicals that are made in Hollywood during this period emphasize dance, and that's why some of the figures that we remember are Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, who would dance together in a number of different musicals and would show off their dancing prowess. Or, for example, somebody like Gene Kelly, who co-directed Singing in the Rain and who stars as Don Lockwood. And in most of the MGM musicals that Kelly makes, there's a sequence that doesn't really have anything to do with the plot, except that it shows off just what a phenomenal dancer Gene Kelly is. So the Broadway melody plot, or the Broadway melody scene, I should say, in Singing in the Rain really doesn't have anything to do with the story. They even make a joke about that in the context of Singing in the Rain. But the Broadway melody does show off Gene Kelly's chops as a hoofer, and he much preferred to emphasize the dance in his work rather than the singing because he thought he was a much stronger dancer than he is a singer. Pictured here on the slide is Maurice Chevalier, who was a big musical star of the early 1930s and who was the basis, incidentally, for the character Pepe Le Pew in the Warner Brothers cartoons. He was the kind of overly amorous Frenchman. I pierce you with the ack of love. He was the amorous Frenchman who actually was a musical star without dancing at all. He would usually just sing in place. Many of his musical numbers are charming to watch, but not for the same reasons that it's charming to watch the dancing of somebody like Gene Kelly. I say on the slide that the classical musical incorporates varying degrees of integration between song, dance, and narrative. So in addition to sort of like creating musicals that could be designed around rock music or around operettas, and mixing up the amount of song compared to the amount of dance that you can have in individual musicals, you also have the relationship between these formal elements and narrative, where some of the songs advance the narrative and some of the songs don't. Singing in the Rain is full of numbers that don't advance the narrative at all, right? That are kind of spectacles for their own sake. So the scene that's referenced in Singing in the Rain here on the slide is from Moses Supposes. And the lyrics are utter nonsense. They have a little bit to do with the plot in the sense that Don Lockwood is visiting a diction coach because he has to learn to speak correctly for the conversion to sound. But that could have been established with a 30-second dialogue scene. Instead, we get a 5-minute number where where he and Cosmo sing nonsense words, right? Moses supposes his toes are roses, and Moses supposes erroneously, which have nothing to do with diction except for being a tongue twister that allows Don Lockwood to practice. But it goes on, and then the lyrics drop off, and Gene Kelly and Donald O'Connor, the two performers, dance for 3 minutes without singing anything. That's a good example of a number that is not narratively motivated. It's just dropped into the narrative to be performative rather than something that advances the plot. The interesting thing about these numbers is that they're perfect examples of sort of embedded cinema of attractions films within the context of the musical, right? And when the performers are performing, particularly in this Moses Supposes number, both Gene Kelly and Donald O'Connor look directly at the camera and show off. It ends with them sort of, piling all of these different props in the room on top of the diction teacher, and then they both literally look at the camera and go, "Hey!" As if to say, we're making a little bit of cinema of attractions, that we've switched from a narrative mode into a performative, directly looking at the fourth wall, directly looking at the audience kind of performance that is very reminiscent of the cinema of attractions. And I think that's one of the things that defines the musical genre as well, that it brings back the power of the cinema of attractions, this performative mode, and it has less to do with narrative than some of the other genres that we're going to be studying this semester. So those are some of the things we'll hit on when we talk about Singing in the Rain in class, and I'll see you this week.